Good evening and welcome to Biz in Focus. I'm Zinat Musafir. Joining us this evening is Emeritus Professor of the University of Colombo and the Associate Director of Regional Centre for Strategic Studies, Professor Indralal De Silva. This evening we will discuss certain burning issues such as unemployment, demographic transition and of course security for the aging population. Good evening, Professor.
Thank you.
So Professor, starting off with the program, the demographic transition in Sri Lanka, how will this impact the Sri Lankan population?
Yeah, demographic transition, actually we can consider the changes in the population. The changes in the population basically come across through the three parameters or three components. We call the live births component and the how long people can live, the life expectancy component. Other component is the international migration, and all these three components together contribute to any population, then we call the demographic transition. Therefore, in a very simple example, like about 150 years back, our population was only 2.4 million 150 years back, but by 2012 our population was over 20 million, and right now we are approaching close to 22 million. And because of this demographic transition, we are expecting Sri Lankan population to grow until up to 22 million by 2022, and by 2040s we expect that population to be increased to 25 million. And along with that such a rapid increase, we expect that numerous problems and the challenges we are going to face, from environment to all kind of services we have to provide for increasing population. Therefore, there will be numerous challenges for construction, numerous challenges on the transportation, service sector like electricity and so many other areas.
Professor, now talking about the demographic transition, have there been any major structural changes in the population? And
yeah, in fact there are significant changes in the structure of the population. Say for example, as I told you that not only the total population has increased, even our structure, say if you take the sex structure of the population, it has changed significantly. Some time back we had more men in the society, but right now we have more women in the society. Say for example, right now for every 100 females, we have only 93 men in the society. Therefore, Sri Lankan population is very much feminized, so more females we have. On the other hand, we are observing significant change in the age structure of the population, which is very important for future challenges to understand the future challenges. Say for example, if you take the child population, the proportion of child population was only 25% by 2012, and 2030s that will going to decline significantly. But what is the most important group is the aging population, which is 60 years and above population, and 2012 it was only 14% of the population, but by 2030s we are expecting that will rise to 23% or 24% even. That means by another say 15-20 years time, 1 out of 4 of the Sri Lankan population we will identify as an elderly person. And at the same time we will observe that there is a change in the working age population and change in the elderly population. That leads to something called demographic dividend. That leads to demographic dividend mean, what is demographic dividend mean? It is some sort of bonus period. Each and every country go through this bonus period where they have a very large proportion of people in the working ages. If any country can use this demographic bonus productively, that country can take the economy into higher orbit, or economic takeoff is possible. Such countries are of course like Korea, Singapore, China, even many countries in tiger countries we can observe that kind of nations. But Sri Lanka, of course, demographic dividend is concerned. Our demographic dividend actually started somewhere around 1990s, and it will run through until up to 2030s. But the point is that the best part of the demographic dividend has already disappeared. It is not only that, in order to capitalize the demographic dividend in more productively, we need to have some other factors also, like we require to have a political stability in the country, that is the number one, and then good savings, we need to have a very productive type of savings, and also good investment we require, and also top of all those things we required knowledge economy. Therefore, higher education, knowledge economy, good decision making process, everything is required for a country in order to utilize the demographic bonus or demographic dividend era more productively. Therefore, demographic dividend is we are right now is having very large proportion of people in the working ages, that is 15 to 59 years of age, but coming era that proportion is about to decline, and therefore, we have already consumed that best part of it, and because of the aging population rapidly our dividend will disappear very significantly.
Thank you, Professor, and with that we are going in for a short commercial break. Do stay tuned for more on the other side. Welcome back to Biz in Focus. Joining us this evening is Emeritus Professor of the University of Colombo and the Associate Director for the Regional Centre of Strategic Studies, Professor Indrelal De Silva. So, sir, we were talking about the labour workforce in the country. According to the World Bank, the labour workforce in Sri Lanka is declining in the near future. What would you have to say about that?
Yeah, in fact, there are some arguments that the Sri Lankan labour force is declining, but my argument is it is not. In fact, Sri Lankan population is expected to increase much faster than we earlier predicted, and in the same time the labour force is simply a supply of the population to the labour force. Therefore, once the population is increasing, we expect that labour force also to be increased. And also other point is that not only it is the Sri Lankan population, but we are observing that sizable number of foreign workers are coming to Sri Lanka. Therefore, once the foreign workers are here, and that will be added to the Sri Lankan labour force, therefore naturally Sri Lankan labour force will increase. Therefore, if I put the statistics onto you, 1981 the Sri Lankan labour force is was only about 5 million. 1981, and 2017 the Sri Lankan labour force was increased, the Sri Lankan labour force increased to 8.56 million or 8.5 million the labour force in 2017, and we expect that Sri Lankan labour force to increase to over 10 million by 2032. Therefore, by another 15-20 years time, definitely Sri Lankan population will increase to over 10 million. Therefore, naturally there is a very significant growth in the local labour force is concerned. If we forget about the foreign labour coming to Sri Lanka, once you add that component, definitely it is going to be a more large numbers we can expect. And also then there is another very important point in the Sri Lankan labour. 1980s, of course, only 25% of the Sri Lankan labour force was females, 1981. That means balance 75% was males. However, by 2017 that figure has changed to 37%. That means right now we are having 37% of the females in our labour force, and by 2030s, by another 15-20 years time, definitely we are going to have more, that is 38 or 39% of the Sri Lankan labour force we are expecting as females. And in the same time, once you consider the labour force, very important to understand the what you call the youth also. As I mentioned that earlier, we are observing some sort of youth bulge, and also we are expecting that they are going to add to the Sri Lankan labour force. What is youth bulge mean? Basically, some countries after increase of fertility, Sri Lanka also have experienced some sort of upturn in fertility somewhere around early 2000 to until up to 2015. Therefore, we had more births in the country, and then we are expecting that those births now they are grown up and they will enter into the Sri Lankan labour force by 20s and 30s definitely. Therefore, youth bulge means that suddenly we are going to have a large volume of young people or youth. Therefore, simple example if I mention year 2012 we had only 4.7 million youth in the country 15 to 29, but 2030s we are going to observe that more than 5 million, 5.2, 5.3 million youth in the country. Therefore, youth is a very important component, because if you are unable to provide good education and good employment or productive employment opportunities to them, there is a threat that they may engage in sometime violence activities. Radicalization, basically they may come from that particular group if they are not satisfied with the systems operating in the country. Therefore, right now if I mention that youth are concerned, the Sri Lankan labour force, it is only about 21% of the Sri Lankan labour force comprised with the youth. The balance almost 80% is the more than 30 years of age. Therefore, we expect that along with the increase of the youth population, we expect that their contribution in the Sri Lankan labour force is also going to increase. Therefore, along with that we need to look at the challenges we are going to observe. One may argue that having large youth population is actually a benefit to the country, but if you are unable to manage that, there are a lot of other issues.
So, Professor, now you spoke of this youth bulge. Does Sri Lanka right now at present have the proper policies and measures in place to make sure that the maximum benefit will be obtained through this youth bulge?
Yes, a very important question for most of our research, my own research and my center, Region Center for Strategic Studies. Our research basically indicates that youth are not happy in this country. They said more than 50% of the youth in this country say that they want to find employment in some foreign country, some unknown labour market. They would like to get employment. Therefore, they do not have much trust on the Sri Lankan systems. Therefore, that is little bit of frustration we can observe. Therefore, we need to develop good policies, and our economy we have to develop very well to accommodate them, because nowadays youth are not willing to go for very much traditional type of employment categories. Therefore, we need to create new employment opportunities for them in order to absorb them into our economy. However, my own observation is that that is not happening in a significant level. Therefore, bulk of our youth are entering into the employment categories like three-wheel employment and some other categories which are not very productive, and bulk is idling. Therefore, some of they say that they are in the higher education or some technical education, but not very productive form.
Thank you, Professor. And with that, we are going in for a short commercial break. Do stay tuned for more on the other side. Welcome back to Biz in Focus. Joining us this evening is Emeritus Professor of the University of Colombo and the Associate Director of the Center for Strategic Studies, Professor Indralal De Silva. So, Professor, we were talking about several burning issues with regard to the change in our population, the structure. Now we were talking about youth bulge as well, and like the youth bulge, there is also an aging population.
Yes.
Does Sri Lanka have in place the proper policies, the programs, security programs to support this aging population?
Yeah, in fact, as I mentioned that Sri Lankan population is aging very rapidly. That means the proportion of elderly population 60s and above who are in the population is rising very significantly. If I give some statistics to qualify that, 2017 we have about 3 million, slightly over 3 million elderly population, and it is expected to rise that one to more than 5 million by 2030s, early 30s. That means almost getting double the elderly population. But what is most important is that the structure of the elderly population I am not going to discuss much, but however, among the elderly population nearly 60 to 65% is the females. Therefore, you can understand even within the elderly population there are some differences compared to the sex structures and other things. But what is most important is that right now we are having slightly more than 3 million elderly people in the society, in the country, 60 years and above, Of them, what is the number receiving pensions from the government pension schemes? It is only 630,000 receiving right now the pension benefits. That means they were sometime in the government service, state sector employees they were. Therefore, 630,000 now receiving pension benefits. But in the same time, the pension payment is very large. It is about 15 billion per year, and it is a large amount. And if you take 20% of the elderly, that 630,000 you can convert as a proportion, that means nearly 20% of the Sri Lankan elderly population receiving some pension benefits. Apart from that, there is another 45% of the elderly have received some sort of EPF and ETF benefits. That is only lump sum they receive at the time of retirement, age 55 or age 60 or whatsoever. And also there is another 5% of the elderly population covered by what you call this farmers pension scheme, fishermen's pension scheme, and also particularly pension schemes offered by the Sri Lanka Social Security Board, and their component is something like 5%. Therefore, altogether, even though we have over 3.2 million elderly, only about 50% have received some benefits, but only 20% is receiving monthly benefits. Others have received some sort of what we call lump sum through EPF and ETF. And then if I come to more details about the bulk of our current labor force, even you take our current labor force, nearly 60% of our current labor force out of over 8 million is falling under the category of what we call self-employed and informal sector workers, 60%. Usually they do not have any pension program, and bulk of the self-employed people, of course, they do not have any sort of social security after they retire. Therefore, it is very, very important for country to consider developing good pension scheme for what you call self-employed and informal sector workers. Without that, elderly people are going to be in a very vulnerable situation. Those who are receiving some pension benefits, of course, they are very much welcomed by the families, and they are very much looked after by the families. But suppose they do not have any pension scheme or pension benefits after age 60 or after 65 or whatever, and they are not in a better position. Therefore, in order to, if I tell in a very broader term, well-being of the elderly or productive aging, well-being of the aging is concerned, it is very important to develop good pension programs, or it may be some sort of contributory pension programs where the worker also contribute, the government also contribute. Therefore, for their future benefit, well-being is concerned, it is extremely important for us to develop pension programs. Without that, bulk of our elderly people are going to be in a miserable situation.
So, Professor, now we were talking about the pension schemes. Now, the pension schemes mainly targets the aging population, but likewise, when we talk about the poor communities in Sri Lanka, the Samudri program has been in place for several years. What is your take on the Samudri program that is currently in place?
Yeah, Sri Lanka time to time has introduced actually a large number of poverty alleviation programs. Sometime it was Jana Savya, and recently it declared as a Samurdhi. The point I want to indicate is that there is no particular monitoring and evaluation of this kind of programs, unfortunately, in Sri Lanka. Therefore, if I tell you the statistical point of view, right now, as far as I know, nearly 1.4 million households or the families, if I mention in a more common word, families, 1.4 million families in Sri Lanka receiving Samurdhi benefits. One may argue that benefits are small, all kind of things, but it is a benefit. Therefore, 1.4 million. How many families we have in the country? Slightly over 5 million families we have. Therefore, out of 5 million families, 1.2 million families are receiving Samurdhi benefits right now. Therefore, they are depending on this kind of benefits. In the same time, there is some sort of proposal to provide Samurdhi benefits for another 600,000 new kind of recipients. Therefore, if you add that 1.4 into another 600,000, that is going to be 2 million families in Sri Lanka. Out of 5 million families going to receive Samurdhi benefits. Therefore, it is a fairly large proportion of families are going to receive these Samurdhi benefits. Therefore, how can we manage? Number one, the financial part. Other part is that why bulk of these Samurdhi recipients were unable to go out of this poverty trap. Whether they have really moved out of the poverty trap, there is no particular evaluation. We are continuously providing Samurdhi benefits or some other benefits to the society without monitoring and evaluating. Therefore, in Sri Lankan society, unfortunately, some sort of dependency syndrome has been forming for many more years, which need to be tackled carefully. We need to strengthen the population rather than going for develop what you call dependency syndrome.
Okay. So, Professor, has the Samurdhi program served its purpose, or do you have any recommendations for further improvements?
Well, first thing is that we need to have a good monitoring and evaluation. Definitely, simple example I can say that in a joke we tend to say that some people receive the Samurdhi benefits, they come through the Benz vehicle and get the Samurdhi benefits. Therefore, even it is a joke, but it has some reality. Therefore, you can understand that how poor our monitoring and evaluation. In the same time, it is a tax money we have to provide for very large segment, say about now if it is 2 million mean, nearly 40% of the Sri Lankan families are going to receive these benefits. What is their psychology? What is their dependence? What is called dependency syndrome? We need to tackle these things very carefully. And sometimes I know some families, some members are in the Middle East or somewhere, but they hide that particular fact and they receive the Samurdhi. Therefore, Samurdhi is actually some sort of social protection, social security for the people who are really in a vulnerable situation, to uplift their capacities, uplift. The social protection is really to uplift them, not to create some sort of dependency syndrome among them. But unfortunately, bulk of our policies are to further develop dependency syndrome on the state rather than self-employment, entrepreneurship, capacity development, knowledge economy, technical know-how, very poor.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. And with that, we wrap up Biz in Focus. Joining us this evening was Emeritus Professor of the University of Colombo, Professor Indrelal De Silva. Thank you, Professor, once again for joining us. And do stay tuned for more business updates next week on Biz in Focus.